Hello. Welcome to our Interfaith Peace Education Conference on the role of interfaith education in conflict prevention and sustainable peace. My name is Heather Harlan Nakagaki. I'm an officer of the Buddhist Council of New York, and I will be your host today to introduce our speakers. First, I would like to ask you to take your cell phone and please turn it off or put it on airplane mode. This conference will be simultaneously translated into Japanese by Stacy Smith and Marie Cochran. You can use a white earpiece for the translation, where you can hear English on channel 1 and Japanese on channel 7. Just a moment, please.
I'm sorry. 日本語の方、7番、1番が英語になってます。そして7番、分かりますかね、順番に押していただくと7番に合わせられます。そうすると日本語が聞こえます。
日本語は7番です。This international conference aims to facilitate a working ground for educators and followers of different faiths to discuss ways to open paths for using interfaith education for the cause of peace building and prevention of social conflict. The conference will contribute to sustainable peace by offering solutions to conflicts arising from violent extremism and religious radicalization at local, national, and global levels. This conference is co-hosted by the Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations. I would like to introduce our first speaker of the conference, Ambassador Anwarul Chaudhary, for an inspirational peace message. Ambassador Chaudhary has devoted many years as an inspirational champion for sustainable peace and development, and ardently advancing the cause of the global movement for the culture of peace that has energized civil society all over the world. As a career diplomat, permanent representative to the United Nations, president of the UN Security Council, president of the UNICEF Board, UN Undersecretary General, senior special advisor to the UN General Assembly President, and recipient of the U-Thant Peace Award, UNESCO Gandhi Gold Medal for Culture of Peace, the Spirit of the UN Award, and the University of Massachusetts Boston Chancellor's Medal for Global Leadership for Peace, Ambassador Chaudhary has a wealth of experience in the critical issues of our times: peace, sustainable development, and human rights.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nakagaki, for your kind introduction. I thank all of you for extending the invitation to me to speak. I very much appreciate the initiative on the role of interfaith education in conflict prevention and sustainable peace. My appreciation to the Mission of Japan for hosting this event, and also deep appreciation to the Buddhist Council of New York, Peace Islands Institute, Nagasaki Interfaith Council, and the Journalists and Writers Foundation. All religions, all faiths teach us to be good human beings with compassion for each other. Their teachings, their messages are noble and universal, but on many occasions those are, as we say, lost in translation, failing to create true understanding and generate a spirituality that makes our planet a better place to live. One of the most spiritual things we can do is to embrace our humanity. Connect with those around us to show love, warmth, and appreciation for each other. To paraphrase Mother Teresa, who lamented, saying that the greatest disease today is not cancer. It is being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. She said, we can cure physical diseases with medicine, but the only cure for despair and hopelessness, hatred and prejudice, violence and conflict is love and compassion. Drawing attention to a different kind of poverty, poverty of spirituality, she said, and I quote, "There are many in the world who are dying for a piece of bread, but there are many more dying for a little love." End of quote. Spirituality raises each one of us to a much higher level of consciousness, where we are truly empowered to share and receive love and compassion unconditionally. Spirituality is a universal human experience, something that touches us all. It is a broad concept with room for many perspectives. Spirituality, therefore, is integrally linked with interfaith work, which aims at religious pluralism taken as normative and ensures that religious differences do not cause conflict or even concern. From Asia to Africa, to America, to Europe, the world seeks a remedy for prejudice, violence, and conflict. It is the need of the hour. The key to interfaith harmony and to reducing violence lies in education, a universal education that encourages pluralism. Yesterday, I moderated a conference near Los Angeles, billed as World Summit of Educators, focusing on education for global citizenship, which brought together 75 educators from 30-plus countries. Outcome of the conference also linked tolerance and respect for diversity to education. The United Nations Secretary General has highlighted the global citizenship in his Global Education First initiative, launched in December 2012. When the world leaders gathered at the UN in September 2015 and adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, popularly known as Sustainable Development Goals, even popularly as SDGs. The specific goal on education identified global citizenship, the culture of peace and nonviolence among the essential elements needed for meaningful education, which creates a reverence for diversity and a sense of belonging with the whole world, which raises human values above everything else and promotes the oneness of humanity. Progressive times require the culture of peace, which recognizes that peace not only is the absence of conflict, but also requires a positive, dynamic, participatory process where dialogue is encouraged and conflicts are solved in a spirit of mutual understanding and cooperation. As such, the United Nations Program of Action on the Culture of Peace asserts that a key role in the promotion of a culture of peace belongs to all, including religious bodies and groups. Recognizing that the moral imperatives of all religions, convictions, and beliefs call for peace, tolerance, and mutual understanding, the United Nations reaffirmed that interreligious dialogue constitutes important dimensions of the culture of peace and proclaimed in 2010 that the first week of February every year will be observed as the World Interfaith Harmony Week between all religions, faiths, and beliefs. Secretary General Ban, in his message last year for this week, mentioned that the World Interfaith Harmony Week celebrates the principles of tolerance and respect for the other that are deeply rooted in the world's major religions. The observance is also a summons to solidarity in the face of those who spread misunderstanding and mistrust. Let me conclude by underscoring that when the education becomes meaningful, when children understand that human values exist in all the great traditions, when children glimpse the humanity of believers of other faiths, and when children know that the truth is expressed outside their own religion, then narrow-mindedness, the root of violence and terrorism, will not survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Chowdhury, for your wonderful message. Now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Monsignor Joseph Grech. Monsignor Joseph Grech, originally from Malta, is First Secretary at the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the United Nations in New York, and has been serving the mission for the last 3 years. He was ordained as a priest for the Diocese of Gozo in Malta in 2001. Soon after his ordination, he served for 8 years as a parish vicar at the Santa Maria del Buon Consiglio parish in Rome. He obtained a doctorate in canon and civil law from the Pontifical Lateran University in Rome.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, dear ladies and gentlemen. I wish to thank the Permanent Mission of Japan, the Nagasaki Interfaith Council, the Peace Island Institute, the Buddhist Council of New York, and the Journalists and Writers Foundation for the kind invitation to participate in this afternoon's conversation on the important role of interfaith education in preventing conflicts and promoting lasting peace. Across the centuries, and still today, one would have to be blind or obstinately biased not to see the enormous good that comes from faith, not just for individuals, but for society. Long before the founding of the United Nations, long before the birth of many of the states represented here, religious believers have been helping to lift the poor out of privation, feed the hungry, build hospitals to care for the sick, found educational institutions for orphans and poor girls and boys, care for our common home, welcome strangers, reconcile warring factions, build peace, battle injustice, and advocate in manifold ways for the dignity and rights of those so often left behind. Those living by the Golden Rule, common in one form or another to almost all major religions, whose faith in God has motivated them to sacrifice their time, talents, material possessions, and sometimes even their lives for their neighbors and strangers, will always be essential catalysts for the social good, because not even the most efficient and expansive government bureaucracies will be able to render expendable the experience, energy, and inexhaustible efforts of individuals and non-governmental organizations whose fundamental motivation is the love of the neighbor that flows from faith in God. At the same time, we know tragically that religious faith, both past and present, has not always been exclusively a cause of good. There are some who wonder whether religion is really a force for peace or for violence, who question whether religious faith inspires people towards good rather than evil, towards charity rather than carnage. They'll cite the Crusades, the centuries-long war known as the War of Religion, and the human sacrifices of the Aztecs and worshippers of Moloch as supposedly incontestable evidence that religious faith produces sadism rather than good Samaritans. They'll point out the atrocities produced in the name of religion as the poisonous fruit produced by faith. One of the principles of basic fairness, however, is that we judge any religion or philosophy not by those who don't live according to its teaching, but by those who do. A believer who thinks that the commandment "thou shalt not kill" means a green light to do exactly the opposite is certainly not an observant and obedient one, and that a person's infidelity should tar the fidelity of the rest. While religion has not been successful in restraining every believer's propensity for evil or violence, the absence of religion, as we saw last century in a abhorrent bloodbath unleashed by virus, secularist, anti-religious, or explicitly atheistic regimes, has likewise struggled, and perhaps struggled even more. The point is that while religious faith is one of the most potent forces for lighting a fire for the good of the world, when it is manipulated, corrupted, or hijacked, it can fuel personal, social, and cultural arsons. That's why our topic today on the role of interfaith education in preventing conflict and promoting peace is so important. How do we engage in interfaith education in such a way as to build rather than to destroy, to harness the enormous good while inoculating against abuses? At the risk of simplification, I think good interfaith education, like any education, involves three basic elements. The first is engaging in the type of dialogue that will allow believers of different faiths to know accurately what they believe and what others believe. So many difficulties flow from false or caricatured understanding of what others believed based on interpretation or of objectionable words or deeds of an unrepresentative few. In many places, however, interreligious dialogue has never risen above the level of bilateral dialogues. True dialogue is done with respect for each other's dignity, conscience, intimate convictions, sincere desire to know and serve God, and sacrifice to serve others. Even if one thinks the other is mistaken about the answer to some of the most important questions, such dialogue leads to an education that can quell prejudice and stereotypes, unwarranted fears and discrimination, leaving room for mutual respect. This conversion should not be limited to religious leaders, but extended as far as possible to all believers, since it is above all the conversation in daily life that will bear the most fruit. The second step is the fair, clear, and cordial transmission of what one believes and what others believes, so that friendship and collaboration, rather than prejudice and alienation, have a chance to ensue. Among the essential elements that are beneficial for a solid interfaith formation would be the golden rule: treat others as you would have them treat you, conveyed not merely as an ethical principle, but as something pleasing to God. The moral sense that God desires us to treat each other with fraternity, rather with the animosity of Cain versus Abel, and that the failure to respect another's violates one's own principle of faith. The respect for one's other's religious freedom, and therefore, in disputed points, to propose rather to impose the truth. Genuine formation as a peacemaker includes the importance of forgiveness and reconciliation, based on a heightened sense of one's own need for God's mercy, and a clear condemnation of evil, including when evil means are used in favor of a good religious end. The final step is to live by those principles to the extent possible, personally and communally. Pope Francis talks about interfaith dialogue and education as a joint journey in which people of different religions and cultures, neighborhood and nations, begin to walk together, recognizing how much humanity have in common, how much beauty and goodness exist in each other, and how much wisdom is imbued in the way the other approaches the most important questions of human life. This walking together can lead to working together in projects that not only strengthen mutual bonds, but also serve society in joint interfaith activities. One of the most important of these would be common witness in an increasingly secularized society, and of the importance of beauty and of a life of faith, and the help that light of ethical principles illumined by faith can bring to public debates about common good, freedom, human dignity, rights, and more. These are the principles of the Catholic Church at her best. It seeks to promote across the world, particularly in its over 200,000 parishes, 95,000 elementary schools, 44,000 high schools, and tens of thousands of colleges and universities, where Catholics and the non-Catholics are educated and formed to recognize the dignity of every person and the rights, responsibilities, and way of life that flows from that recognition. These are also the principles that the Holy See and millions of Catholics adopt in formal and informal interreligious dialogue. In his exhortation laying out the pastoral program of his pontificate, called The Joy of the Gospel, Pope Francis said that interreligious dialogue is a necessary condition for peace in the world, and so, he continued, is a duty for Christians as well as other religious communities. Proper, solid, sincere, engaging, mutual interfaith education, we know, is not sufficient in and of itself for preventing conflicts and sustaining peace, but it is indeed necessary. Because of that necessity, it's something that should be supported by all religious faiths and those of no faith, by government and civil society, by public and private education institutions, and by the media and culture. Today's event is a bright spotlight on its crucial importance, and I thank the organizer once again for inviting the Holy See to participate in this conversation.
Thank you, Monsignor Gretsch. Next, we will have our first panel, Identifying Conflicts and Interfaith Education. I would like to invite our panelists to come up to the front. Dr. Carol Dahir, Father Isao Hashimoto, Joyce Dupensky, and Sheikh Saeed Faid. Please come up to the front. Oh, they're all here? Everybody's here. Okay. I want to make sure everybody was here. We weren't missing anyone. Okay. The moderator of our first panel is Dr. Carol Dahir. She's a professor and chair of the School Counseling Department at NYIT, New York Institute of Technology. For more than 20 years, she has worked extensively in state departments of education, school systems, school counselor associations, and national organizations on designing, delivering, and evaluating comprehensive school counseling programs that service all students. Dr. Dahir has been involved in transforming school counseling since 1997, which emphasizes addressing the needs of underserved and underrepresented populations. She will introduce our panelists.
Thank you. Let me see if this is on. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll have to speak up. It's my pleasure. It's on? Okay, thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel. I'm going to dispense with opening remarks because I know we've started a little late. To my left, Shaykh Fahid Mohammed Saeed, who is one of the most prominent Islamic scholars and authors of our time. Shaykh Fahid's efforts include teaching and community outreach, work in the UK, and I heard today he came all the way from Dubai to be with us. Mm-hmm. Among his specialization is discussion about coexistence, interfaith, Islam in the West, counterterrorism narrative, and sharing the core of the transformative message of the Prophet Muhammad. To my immediate left is Joyce Dubensky. She did not quite travel as far. Joyce and I both came from Manhattan. She is Tannenbaum's CEO and is a noted author and international presenter. Ms. Dubensky speaks and conducts workshops on all the Tannenbaum programs, including the Alliance of Civilizations, also at the United States Institute of Peace, the International Academy of Practical Theology, Merck, Quality Care for Diverse Populations, and Harvard Universities. And to my right is Father Isao Hashimoto, who is the first Secretary, Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the United Nations, and also one of the sponsors of our event today. I'm going to turn our discussion right over to Ms. Dubensky, and she will start our discussion this afternoon.
Not on. I'm hitting yes, and it's not doing anything.
Yes.
This button?
Yes. It's on now.
I'm on.
Yeah.
Hi. Good afternoon. It's really an honor to be with you, and I want to thank all of the sponsors for making today possible. This is an important conversation, and I do believe that you will hear themes across the speakers. I know that I will be repeating some of the things that you've already heard. But I want to start by saying that I think today's subject is complicated. Identifying conflicts and interfaith education. The truth is, we live in a complicated world and in a world of conflict. We have terrorism, extreme ideologies, poverty, inequality, and more. And they both cause conflict and they are the result of conflict. But another truth is that there isn't just one solution and one approach to solving them. There are a myriad of approaches for responding to these ills. So today we're focusing on really only one of them, and that's interfaith education. What it is, how it can contribute to preventing and resolving conflicts, and how it can support stable societies so that people can live better in justice. I'm going to tackle this issue in three ways. I'm going to start with some generalizations, some general reflections just about interfaith education. Then I'm going to tell you about Tannenbaum, my organization, and some of the practical things that we do to help teachers so that students can be educated to be global citizens, successfully able to work with people across the globe who believe differently and come from different backgrounds and traditions. And finally, I'm going to tell you a story about two women from very different religions, religious traditions and experiences, and how they came together to bring to their students peace education. So first, some of my reflections. It seems to me that when we talk about education, very often what we're really talking about is secondary education or university education. But if we're really thinking about education, it's a whole lot more. It's the education that our youngest students receive and need to receive during their most impressionable years. And it's adult learning, like training diplomats and beginning to train them so that they know how to work with people of different religions and how to work with religious actors in armed conflicts. In a world of rapid change, education is not just for the young. It needs to be a lifelong process. One way to do this, and it's only one of the ways, is through interfaith dialogue and interfaith collaboration and joint problem solving. But that requires us to learn new skills, like finding ways to listen and to learn from one another, even as we hold our